Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Kathie. Mind, body, brute.
Hey, and welcome back. My name is Mike Kathie, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I've got two guests. The first is Chad Vaughn, two-time Olympian and Pan American champion for the United States, one of the best male lifters in the past couple decades. And the second is Cheryl Haworth, who is without a doubt the best female American lifter in the past couple decades. Cheryl was a three-time Olympian and a bronze medalist in the 2000 Olympic Games. She was also a junior world champion in 2001 and 2002. We start the show off talking about Cheryl's weightlifting career as a young kid. She started when she was 14 and then qualified for the Olympics only 4 years later. I talked to her about what it was like, what the experience was like being a high school athlete going through so many changes so quickly. She was even on the Jay Leno show when she was 17, gearing up for the Olympics. So we talk about what it was like going through all of that as a kid. We talk about her experience going through art college as a weightlifter. And then we get into a longer discussion about the future of USAW, including the rise of some of our young studs such as Harrison Morris and CJ Cummings. We talk about steroids in the sport of weightlifting and how we see the future of the sport kind of leveling out, the leveling of the playing field. And then we talk about just some really cool experiences from the Olympics that they both shared, as well as some cool stories about bombing out that Chad had at the World Championships and even at the Beijing Olympics. To me, that seems like one of the worst experiences imaginable, but he talks about it as being one of the biggest lessons learned in his career and one of the most impactful experiences of his entire career. These two are obviously some of the best American athletes of all time, some of the best weightlifters of all time. And it was a real pleasure to talk to two athletes that competed at the very highest level and get a glimpse into their mindset about both themselves and the sport in general. Before we get started, if you haven't done so already, I would love for you to head to iTunes and leave me a quick review. And also, if you haven't done so already, I've got a cool new thing for you. It's a downloadable PDF with the top 5 most downloaded podcasts that I've ever done. And there are some of the biggest takeaways from each of those podcasts right on the PDF. So really high valuable document. You can get it at brutestrengthtraining.com/top5. That's brutestrengthtraining.com/top5. Enjoy the show. Chad and Cheryl, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to be back on the Brute Strength Podcast once again.
Hell yeah. So both of you are two of the best athletes in American history and certainly two of the best weightlifters in American history. How did you guys meet originally?
Originally, reaching back, way back. I mean, Chad and I, we overlapped a lot. I mean, obviously we were on the 2004 and 2008 Olympic teams together. We'd done Pan Ams and the World Championships together. Really familiar with his coach and, Ursula more specifically. And just being in the same room for the last 10 years. I don't know, Chad, maybe you have a more distinct memory of when we actually met, but
I mean, I think we ran into each other, a number of times along the way. And when Cheryl says being in the same room, that means we were in the same national and international competitions, but especially initially the same national competitions, being in the same room. Back then it was a very much smaller room. It was one platform instead of 3 or 4 platforms going at the same time like these days. So it was a much smaller community, and all of us on the national level at least knew each other pretty well because it was such a small, much smaller community. back then. But I remember hearing about Cheryl and watching her lift. And, honestly, she was one of those athletes that I was kind of mesmerized by. I was definitely a fan. And, I for myself, I was definitely striving to be at her level, because initially, I wasn't, and ultimately I never completely made it to Cheryl's level. So I'm still trying to get there. But yeah, I was, I looked up to Cheryl, and we got to know each other a little bit better, more specifically at the 2004 Olympic Games, and then a little more at the 2008 Olympic Games. And, now we've been hanging out a lot more and doing a lot of other things together. And I feel like we're better friends than ever. And I definitely know her a lot more than I did then.
Yeah, I agree. It's just really great to, to reconnect. And, we had our history, and we were both very much in our own heads, like athletes do when they're focused on their own training and stuff like that. And it's just a real pleasure for me to reacquaint myself with one of the best guys that I know, period, not only in USA Weightlifting, but Chad's an absolute pleasure to work with. And talking about being mesmerized by lifting, if you've ever seen Chad lift, he's such a technician. He's so graceful, and still one of the strongest guys out there, even though it's just training for Instagram purposes.
Right.
Hey, don't tell off on me now.
Yeah, I think the weightlifting community is so interesting because it's such a small community, and in competition, you're in this room together for hours and hours. And so it sounds like your experience of each other for the first number of years was just, you would see each other preparing for competition like the day of, you would hear about the other doing well or whatever without having much like one-on-one contact, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's accurate. And then, what happens, you go to the Olympic Games or something like that, and it's a small group. There was only a handful of us. It was Chad, Oscar, and Shane, and myself, Tara, and 2004. I'm missing somebody, I think, from the Olympic team. I shouldn't have started naming names. Anyway,
That's messed up.
I know.
Oh, no.
It's so messed up. I had to Google what place I got at that competition the other day. So 2004 was a little fuzzy for me. Well, anyhow, long story short, you're all in the same room, and it was just me and Tara. Yeah. Okay, I don't feel so bad. So you spend a lot of one-on-one, lots of card games played, lots of mindless fun created out of nowhere. You really get to know somebody in that kind of a situation. So you kind of isolated a little bit, but that was my favorite part about competition, is really getting to know the people that I was sharing the experience with.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and when she talks about room here, we're not talking about the competition hall. We're talking about now at the Olympic Games, where we're basically all in the same room, I guess you would say, different rooms with the same building and floor, I guess. And so that's where we really got to know each other better, got to know the members on the Olympic teams or on the Olympic team a little bit more. And so that experience was, something that, of course, connects you very much with those individuals on that team.
Right. So, Chad, you've been on a couple times, and Cheryl, this is my first time meeting you. So at first here, I want to get to know you a little bit. You have one of the most interesting stories of any athlete I've heard of. And I just realized, I told you this before the show, I just realized that you attended SCAD, which is one of the best art and design schools in the country, where my sister went for advertising. So I'm curious, what did you study, and what was the experience like for you at school already? I mean, what was the experience like for you at school, full of, art nerds lifting at such a high level,
It was, I love the balance of my academic life and my weightlifting life. It would really throw people for a loop when they asked me, oh, well, where are you going to school, or what do you do? And studying art. Wait, what? You're a weightlifter and you study art? I mean, it's really funny that people don't naturally assume that those things would go hand in hand. Yeah. But I was 17 when I got my bronze medal in 2000. So I was still in high school, and always always part of the visual arts program, built up my portfolio, and living there in Savannah, Georgia, Savannah College of Art and Design seemed like a bit of a foregone conclusion. I mean, it's a prestigious school, and it was something that I really wanted to do in addition to training. So, and it didn't interrupt my training at all. I could just stay there at home and do my thing. I studied historic preservation. I got my BFA in 2006, and I minored in illustration. Although I did not finish the minor because I chose to just go ahead and walk and move out to the Olympic Training Center in 2006. But it was a really great balance. And really crazy. It was really hard to manage such an intense college experience, lots of studio work with all the travel that I did have to do. But they were really, really accommodating and wonderful, and threw a huge party for me before 2004, before I went off right in the middle of my college career to compete again at the Olympic Games. So the support of the community there at SCAD, and they really helped me a lot. And it was a really important time in my life that I had that support, because it only got harder.
Right.
But it was a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I became a recruiter at SCAD. After my weightlifting career, I decided that I was finished, just to kind of reacquaint myself with what was happening in the art world. And it's one of my favorite things to do. I still sit down and pound out a still life every once in a while,
Nice.
or some sort of drawing. But I need to do that more often, because it's something that I certainly enjoy, and it's a quiet skill. It's something that it requires a lot of thought and observation. And I think those things help a lot. The observational skills that I have developed over years of looking and figure drawing and really figuring out how people move has been, I think, really helpful for analyzing what's happening with my athletes.
Now, were you the first Olympian to come from SCAD ever? Do you have any idea?
You know what? I think there are other Olympians. I know there's one fella on the admission team presently. I think he competed for a different country, though. And I think we had maybe one or two others, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know off the top of my head.
Man, just throwing so many people under the bus here.
I really am. I'm the worst. But we have really great athletics at SCAD, too. A lot of people don't know. I mean, we have a championship equestrian team. We have a great swim team, and et cetera. And athletics is important. It's important for all kinds of students and athletes, and to stay fit. I mean, the athletes at SCAD do better academically than the folks who don't participate in athletics, because you have to manage your time better, and you're more disciplined just generally. So I think they really do go hand in hand. But we have some amazing athletes coming out of SCAD, that's for sure.
Do you think the dual role, like you having to be a student and athlete, do you feel like it was more stressful and harmful to your performance as an athlete, or was it more helpful in the sense that it gave you something else to focus on, so you weren't constantly stressed out about your training and your next performance?
That's a great question. Knowing myself the way I do, I probably, even though if I had my druthers, I mean, athletes just we want to go to the gym, we want to eat, we want to sleep, and that's more or less all we want to do. But having the additional responsibilities of managing a schedule that was much more complex. I owned my own home at the time. I had just graduated from high school, and for a little period there, I was working at Home Depot as well through their Olympic Job Opportunities program. So I was certainly juggling a lot, but I think that regiment, it helped. I have a tendency to maybe slide into a little less discipline if I'm not expected to do all these other things. So I think it kept me focused, and it kept a healthy balance, I think, really at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I started this business with Matt, and for all my life, I considered myself pretty disciplined. I always played sports, multiple sports at a time, and I had jobs all throughout high school and college. And I thought of myself as very disciplined. And then I had this online company where there was no structure whatsoever. And all of a sudden I felt like a piece of shit. You know, I couldn't, I was totally unstructured and I felt totally undisciplined. And it's like when we don't have those external expectations on us, we have to create them for ourselves. And so I went through this kind of long process of creating structure and discipline for myself because it's what I wanted to do rather than what other people wanted of me. So I can totally relate to that.
Right. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I think that the structure that was imposed upon me really did help kind of keep me a more balanced individual, which again could only lend to more success on the platform.
Right. So Matt told me that when you started out, your nickname was Fun. What was that about?
You know what? It still is. There are certain people in the weightlifting world who call me Cheryl in formal situations. And I'm like, why'd you just call me Cheryl? There are definitely some individuals from the old crew that still use that nickname. I love the nickname. Other people can't use it for the exact same reason. Why'd you just call me Fun? That's weird. Yeah. So it goes back to almost the first week I was training at the Anderson Cohen weightlifting facility in Savannah. I was a kid who spent a lot of time building tree houses and kind of screwing around in the woods, and had just an array of raggedy t-shirts, and one of them said Fun on it. It was like an old Six Flags shirt, and I guess I wore it a lot to the gym, and they started referring to me sort of in a roundabout way as Fun, and then it was... Yeah, it only took about 1 or 2 days to completely stick, and nice. I accepted it. And it seems a little weird of a nickname, but you get used to it. I certainly did, and it's endearing. But it really had to do with the T-shirt I was wearing, not necessarily that I'm a lot of fun per se.
Love it.
She still has that shirt and wears it all the time. By the way,
get out.
You know what? I don't know where that shirt is, but I imagine it is somewhere in my parents' house in some drawer somewhere. I might have to actually find that. And
do you realize how Instagram worthy that'd be if you found that shirt and did a workout in it along with some pajama pants?
That's why you're the boss, man. You're right. I didn't even think about that. Oh, purchase pajama pants, by the way, Chad. That is on the way. I kind of tweaked my adductor the other day, so I was a little embarrassed at the unimpressive weights I was lifting. But as soon as I'm feeling good, I'm going to get in there with those pajama pants, and I'm going to hit you and Harrison Morris up on Instagram.
Nice.
Yo.
Cheryl, you started lifting, I think, when you were 14, correct?
13. Close enough,
13, though. And then 4 years later, at 17 years old, you qualify for the Olympics. So there are a ton of young athletes that qualify for the Olympics, but I don't think I've never heard of someone doing it after training for only 4 years. You were also in that time on the Jay Leno show, and you were considered the youngest woman to ever win a gold medal or a medal at the Olympics in weightlifting. So can you talk to me about that time period a little bit? What was that like for you, being a kid going through all of those changes so rapidly?
You know what? It was, if I had time to sit down and think about it at the time, it could have been potentially pretty overwhelming. I was just, when you're a kid, you're 13 years old, you're trying to figure, I'm screwing around with softball and basketball, whatever season it is. We're very, very active children, often getting locked out of the house when it was a nice day and saying, don't come home until you're exhausted. So to stumble upon, and I always knew I was a strong kid, relative to other kids. And little things like picking up really big, heavy trees that we just, cut down and kind of just moving weight around. And I had some athleticism there. So weightlifting really appealed to me because at the time we were getting a lot of press locally in Savannah because we had some amazing women and men who were actively competing under the tutelage of Michael Cohen, who is a 1980 Olympian, and still one of the most beautiful facilities to train at in the nation for sure. And it was free to anybody who lived in the the county of Chatham there in Savannah. So my softball coach decided that we would all go over there right across the street from the softball complex, and we'd all do a little weightlifting. And visually, I think it appealed to me how much weight was being lifted in the manner it was being lifted. It looked beautiful. I knew I was strong, and going in there and kind of just grabbing the bar, I think I cleaned like 50 kilos the first day, pretty, with pretty good awareness, and I moved well. My mobility is really, really good. I could still do the full splits in every direction. I don't know why. I could do that, but so there were, it kind of all just fell into place. And then almost immediately in the gym, everybody, I grabbed a hold of everybody's attention. And when you're a kid, I'm in middle school, I'm kind of the big kid, I still get along with everybody, but to have suddenly the admiration of everybody just because I can move this weight, and hey, you really need to consider just coming in here and kind of forgetting the softball thing. One thing led to another. The very next junior nationals I won, I think I got second place at the national championship just a few months later, and just started winning virtually every competition nationally that I competed in. And it wasn't too much longer that I would be undefeated in the United States for many, many years, and breaking the records. I broke the American record live on Regis and Kathie Lee, I think in 1999 or early in the year 2000, to promote, the Olympics coming up in women's weightlifting. I didn't know that. Yeah, it was crazy, man. It was so crazy. It was live, and I had never clean and jerked that much weight before.
So, okay, tell me about it. So all you did was clean and jerk.
Yes, they had judges there and everything. Wow. I think it was 135 kilos, and it was live on morning TV. I remember warming up backstage, and not really knowing if I was going to be able to pull this off, but I went out there and I smashed the clean and jerk. Everybody went crazy, and it was just fun. I was enjoying myself so much. And it was, and people refer to me as like a pioneer of the sport or whatever. I was just in the right place at the right time. The groundwork that other women and men had laid down to make women's weightlifting a part of the menu there in 2000, I really had nothing to do with that. I was just a kid who wanted to lift weights, got good at it really quickly, enjoyed the travel. I really enjoyed the people that I lifted with, and virtually everything about it appealed to me. And I just happened to be, coming up right when I can just hop on that first Olympic team. And what an honor it was to share that experience with the team that we had. And if I knew actually what was going on at the time, I would have been way more freaked out, but I was just having such a wonderful experience. I wish I could go back in a time and do things over again, such as when I had my one-on-one stroll through the Olympic Park with Tom Brokaw, and we had a nice long interview and conversation. I had to have sounded like a complete idiot, like Tom Brokaw. Like, I would love to just go back and do some of these things again with the appreciation that I have as to what was actually happening in my life at the time. But yeah, I wouldn't replace it for anything. And what a great experience it all was. Just right place at the right time. That's all I can say.
And I mean, what a gift to not be over analyzing and anxious about everything that's going on, because I could easily see that happening to most kids.
Yeah, it could happen. It could happen for sure. And the more time passed in my career, I think I became more and more of an not anxious. I'm still pretty chill, and I still love to compete. Like, the do or die moments in competition are what I lived for. I remember the World Championships in 1999. I was 15 or 16 at the time. And in order to qualify for the Olympic team, I remember the coaches were like, Cheryl, you got to get a medal. in the snatch. You got to get a medal. We need these points. And I said, load it on the bar. I'll do it. And I did it. And, I'm a natural procrastinator. So I think it actually helps when I'm in a situation where I can't put it off. I literally just have to do it and make it happen. And I lived for those moments as a weightlifter because they seemed important. And those important moments were the ones that I like to go out there and execute.
Yeah. Chad, were you aware of Cheryl when she was up and coming that first quad?
Through that time, I didn't even start training specifically for Olympic lifting competition until I think January of 1998. So it was not really on my radar through that time. I remember, hearing who the Olympic team was in 2000. I remember being one spot out from qualifying for the Olympic trials in 2000 and just looking at the list. And I remember seeing Cheryl's name and, those girls and those guys that were at the top of the list. But that was kind of my exposure to her at that time, and then definitely started digging in more, right after that as I was aiming, to do the best that I could do from the 2000 Olympics on.
I think it's there's an interesting shift going on, and it seems like from a lot of the old timers that I've talked to, weightlifters used to get into weightlifting via other sports. So Cheryl, you got into it via softball. Matt Bruce got into it through football. I was hanging out with Pat Mendez the other day who got into it through football. And now we're starting to see people doing weightlifting at a very young age for the sake of doing weightlifting. And so I would love to talk to you guys about the future of USAW a little bit. I know that you're starting a podcast together, which I think is awesome. It's the first USAW podcast, very much needed in the space. And we have some really, really big up and comers coming on, like Harrison Morris, CJ Cummings, and Maddie Rogers on the female side, as well as a ton I'm sure I don't even know about yet. Over the past, decade or so, we haven't been that competitive internationally, but now it seems like we're headed in a different direction. How do y'all feel about the future of USAW in general?
I've been in specifically the CrossFit community as a teacher of the Olympic lifts, as a coach since very early in 2010. January of 2010 is when I, partnered up with Ursula and my wife Jody, and we started doing some seminars together at that time. And ever since the interest in weightlifting, the sport of weightlifting and USA Weightlifting on its own, not on its own, but USA Weightlifting, the membership of USA Weightlifting grow exponentially. And it's because of the extra exposure that it is getting and that it is still getting. And so what I've seen with that is that it's helped bring in so many more people that are just doing the Olympic lifts. And because so many more people are doing it, we're having more very talented individuals come in. And I think that, one, let me just say that I think it probably been more than 10 years that we were kind of in a slump. But we had, Cheryl and Tara not do very well at the Olympics and win medals and place very high. But other than that, it'd been very long. I think it'd been something like over 20 years since we had an American male get a medal at the World Championships or Olympics. And that was back in, Cheryl, correct me if I'm wrong, was that back in like 1995 with Wes Barnett, who did
that was 1997. I think he got a clean and jerk and total medal, if I'm not mistaken, the world champs in Thailand.
Yeah, and then we had this drought where no American male was even close until Mr. Harrison Morris, who's only 18 years old, maybe even he's only 17 at the time, I can't remember, but at the World Championships just last year, towards the end of 2017, I think he was probably only 17. He gets he gets a clean and jerk and a total medal at the World Championships. And to me, I'm not sure that we have a Harrison Morris if it wasn't for the extra exposure that weightlifting has gotten through CrossFit. I'm not sure of all the up and coming stars that we have. What is the percentage of those individuals that we would have if it wasn't for that extra exposure? And I think it's a very high percentage. There may only be a couple, it would be back like when Cheryl and I were doing our thing. Quite honestly, like I look back and I'm kind of on a part of me is thankful for that, because I don't know that I would have been at the very top if we had the exposure that we had at that time. So I'm kind of thankful that I was in that era where I was able to excel. On the other hand, I kind of wish I would have had that competition, because that competition may have made me better. And I think that's what we're going to see, and what we are seeing is that these individuals at the top, not all of them are as comfortable as we once were at the top, where we were kind of above and beyond all the others that we were competing with on the national level. So it's really cool. It's been a pleasure for me to watch, and that's really a big part of my motivation for being involved in the sport in this way through this USA Weightlifting Podcast, is that I'm very driven to be a part of weightlifting, the sport that I love, and also be a supporter, a representative, a face, a voice for USA Weightlifting, the organization.
So it seems like America really needed the whole CrossFit weightlifting combo to happen, right? We needed CrossFit to push weightlifting to help us compete with these other countries, because so many of them are paying their athletes a decent salary, right? Like even in places like Colombia, which is not like a very rich country, they're paying their athletes a salary to do weightlifting, right? In China, they're paying them a lot of money. What's the guy's name? Lu Xiaojun? Mm-hmm. Allegedly, he's a super rich guy just because he's a weightlifter.
Yeah, it's interesting, just culturally in the different parts of the world that you go. I don't think I've ever seen as many people watch a weightlifting competition as that World Championship in 1999 in Greece. Of course, you have Pyros Dimas lifting, you have Kakiashvili lifting, and it was just, weightlifting is a national treasure there. And it was always something that was a bit elusive here in the West. Weightlifting in particular kind of became an accessory sort of a thing for people to do, and nobody really considered doing it professionally if they could. And CrossFit really has changed that. I think it's obviously introduced so many people to the sport. And then the CrossFitter's very nature is a driven one, and to get better and to excel. And there's all these different facets to it. And I think people who transition from CrossFit to weightlifting make really, really dedicated, strong, well-balanced, typically if they can stay healthy athletes and if they can stay mobile. And that's the pool that we're after. And then once somebody really gets involved with weightlifting, it's such a beautifully challenging sport in that it never becomes easier. The better you get at weightlifting, the harder it gets. The weight gets heavier. And so you can never really rest on your laurels, and there's always a goal to work for. And it's not completely unique in that way. A lot is, some sports are the same way, but it fuels that fire to add that kilo to the bar. And there's so many technical aspects to it that you never feel like you truly have mastered it. Chad and I were talking just yesterday on a podcast about how we, in hindsight, even though Chad would classify himself and myself as good technicians, we always had good technique. I think I missed one jerk ever in a competition. Wow. And I missed a heck of a lot of cleans. So I kind of stopped saying that, because I'm like, I don't know if that makes me good at the jerk or bad at the clean. Right. So moving on. But a good technician, and we were sort of talking about how in our training now there are so many corrections that we're both trying to make in our technique that was already good, because there's just it cannot be perfected. Mm-hmm. It can't. I mean, you can try and you can strive for that, but we all have things to work on, even the best of us. And it's a really, really it's a good challenge. There's a lot of problem solving involved, and I think that's the appeal. Yeah,
it's a really interesting challenge to me, and one that I don't think I could have ever been great at. The fact of weightlifting in that you have to, like, there are so few measures of progress, right? You either lift more weight or you don't. That's pretty much it. In CrossFit, you can get better at a number of different gymnastics and endurance events and weightlifting and football. You've got all of these different plays and techniques and just a million different measures of progress, where in weightlifting, you've got like two.
Yeah, and I think the challenge for a lot of people too is wrapping their minds around how sometimes you're just not going to lift as much weight. And getting into the gym and getting through a workout, or maybe doing 1 or 2 reps that were better than the last 1 or 2 reps you did at that weight, you have to count those as victories.
Right.
It's a victory. It's a victory to go in and do a triple at 85% in the snatch, just a little bit easier than it was last week. And you have to be okay with that. It requires a lot of patience, and it requires a lot of sort of compartmentalization when you, like, sometimes you just have to clean up your weights and go home.
Right.
And you have to be okay with that and not getting out of your body what you expected to get out of your body. So it's not a grind. It's not always about just making it through, because sometimes you just need to go home and rest. And being okay with, all right, let's just move on to the next exercise, or let's just give this another go tomorrow. And it's not detrimental. It's just something that is a fact. So you kind of have to let a lot of things kind of just roll off your back as far as that goes, and the philosophies behind training and weightlifting.
I think that's a really interesting nuance of mental toughness that you just talked about, because most people think that mentally tough means, going into the gym and you leave in a pool of sweat and maybe you injured yourself and you just pushed through anyway. Like, that's what comes to mind when most people think of mental toughness. But mental toughness is also the ability to stay committed to your long-term goals. And at some moments, you have to just go home and rest in lieu of the bigger long-term goals. It's not always about just leaving in a pool of sweat and just hard work. It's this
right.
bigger picture.
Yeah, and the philosophies for weightlifting they're very, very different than CrossFit. I mean, just generally speaking, I met more sort of type A people who excel in CrossFit, and just because you have to be sort of controlling and very intense to do those WODs like every day, like 5 or 6 times a week. And that grind does require a lot of mental toughness. But on the other side of that coin, when you're trying to get better at weightlifting, it's about conserving energy. It's about being thoughtful about each repetition. It's about trying your triples. And if you miss the last rep, you don't grab the bar again for a 4th rep because you missed it. You sit back down, you think about what just happened, and you try to make the correction on the next set. And I spend a lot of time explaining that to my athletes that it is different. We don't want to spend a half hour on an assault bike just to warm up before we do our workout in weightlifting. It's just not conducive to that. So I think there's a lot of education that is out there that can be beneficial for a lot of people trying to make that transition. But you're right. Sometimes it's just about being okay with not being okay that day.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I definitely think it takes a lot more dedication and discipline to hold back when you need to hold back, as opposed to going in and like you said, just working yourself to a pool of sweat and laying on the floor hurting for a while. And that's all fun and good. And sometimes maybe, sometimes those type of workouts are maybe necessary. But here's the thing. I think in the community that we're in, I wish it was that easy. To me, that's the easy part. The easy part is going in and banging your head against the wall as hard as you can for 50 to 100 times every day. And if I can improve by that, if I can improve by doing that, I will gladly take that over having to go in and be more detailed and smart about things. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the other part of that to me is a lot easier, especially with the community of people that we have surrounding us now, and the type of physical toughness that they truly have. A big part of me as a coach and a teacher is trying to get them to hold themselves back a little bit, to go in the other direction, to be a little more slow and detailed and thoughtful about things, to take steps back. And I know, Mike, you and I have talked about a lot about those things on other podcasts that we've been on. So hopefully some of the people out there can go back and listen in. But yeah, I wish it was just as easy as going in and banging my head against the wall. I'll take that any day.
Right. It's just kind of like mindless effort, right? It's painful, but it doesn't take any mental energy to put forth that kind of effort. The mental energy comes from, and the real hard part is being very precise with your effort, with your movement, with your recovery, with your nutrition, all of that kind of stuff, and really taking the time to dial all of that in.
Right, and unleash it in a very, very measured and controlled way. Yeah, and I agree with Chad and you, Mike, that there is something that's easier in a way, and not disparaging it, but just going in there and just putting in the time and kind of going through the motions. And that's why CrossFit appeals to so many people, because anybody can really do it. You just have to physically be there and kind of just go through it. But there is something to be said about pulling back and stepping back and be more thoughtful, which a lot of people find challenging. But I think Chad and we really place a lot of emphasis on that in the way we teach weightlifting, because I think once some of these more philosophical these ideas, people start realizing that it really is about how you're thinking about your workout and how you're approaching it, and being okay with the results and just doing what you can and being smart. I think many people can see a lot of improvement in their own weightlifting just by virtue of understanding how weightlifters operate.
Right. So bringing it back to the topic of international competition, are y'all confident that there will be a more level playing field going forward, given the fact that they're now testing samples going so far back and all of the Russia stuff that came out a couple years ago?
Yeah, Mike, I think that there will be. I think there's always going to be a way around that, and people are going to, probably certainly figure those things out. Hopefully, years down the road, at least, maybe the testing will catch up with it. But I think the doping, and I've heard this said many different ways from different people, but the doping, the testing will never be up to speed with the ability to dope.
Right.
So that's kind of the unfortunate part of it. But I think, one of the things that I want to mention is that with the U.S. being kind of far behind the rest of the world in regards to lifting, or a large part of the world in regards to lifting for so long, that's probably part of it. Certainly. I mean, Cheryl and I back in the day were tested probably on average, at least 15 times a year, once or twice a month out of competition, at just wherever we were at home or work, whatever. Plus every time we went to a national and usually an international competition. But I'll tell you that being a big part of it, that's not all of it. And another part of it is the fact that we have so many more individuals coming into the sport and doing Olympic lifting in the U.S. and making it more popular, because I remember going pretty much anywhere else in the world and just being surprised and kind of having a feeling of, hey, this is really cool. Because I remember going to the Pan American Games in 2003 in Santo Domingo, even just not very far away from here, and seeing posters on the side of the road, or billboards on the side of the road with their Olympic lifters, or one of their Olympic lifters, as the advertisement for the Pan American Games. And kind of the same thing going overseas to different countries and just seeing and observing their weightlifting, those people that were at the top in those countries be their athletic superstars, as opposed to, here in the U.S. where it's football, basketball, baseball, typically.
Yep.
Yeah, and I have my greatest hope is that the playing field will be more level than it's ever been. It's my greatest hope for our American athletes who are rigorously drug tested. Chad spoke to, you can get on the website, USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency, .org, and type in an athlete's name, type in Chad's name, type in my name, and see how many times annually that we were drug tested. And I remember getting phone calls back when I was competing when a drug testing situation would arise. Somebody some journalist would do their research and then call my phone and say, hey, you're the most drug tested Olympian in the United States. How do you feel about X, Y, and Z that just happened? Weightlifting is a suspect sport just by its very nature. So even here within the United States, even though our athletes by and large are clean, we do randomly get drug tested more often than other sports, such as shooters, for example,
right.
or not to pick on shooting, which is incredibly difficult in and of itself, but
still,
so yeah, I think
won't have a huge impact on shooting.
Exactly. So I got drug tested, I think 3 times in the same week once. I think 33 or 4 drug tests annually once, I think probably is the most. Yeah, very, very, very often. And oftentimes when we're talking about the internal monitoring system, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, to be an elite athlete and be in the drug testing pool, we're filling out paperwork quarterly, literally hour by hour, where we will be if we have class schedule. I mean, I've taken my drug test lady to nude figure drawing at SCAD because once they notify you, you cannot leave their site. So they follow you around and they watch you produce a sample, and that sort of thing, having those checks built into our system really, and it culturally, it builds up this respect for it. You begin to appreciate the fact that I was never upset that I got drug tested so much, because I knew it would only help me in the future if anybody ever tried to say anything about anything, that, well, we got lots of frozen pee, you guys knock yourself out, you know?
Yeah.
And I moved up, I think, 2 spaces from 2008. I originally got 6th place. I got 4th place, I think, officially after they retested all these samples. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm not extremely bitter that I competed against a lot of people who are actively doping. And it's something that'll never go away, and it's something that I'm passionate about. And I think that a lot of it is cultural as well. There are certain parts of the world where it really is just you win and you utilize anything at your disposal. If you're not willing to do that, then you maybe just don't need to be a weightlifter. And so I think there are cultural shifts that need to happen that I kind of see beginning to happen. And we just need to always make sure that the influx of weightlifters that we have as a result of CrossFit, et cetera, that we are being aggressive about keeping the playing field level. And we're not allowing people to kind of slide in there with their ideas of, well, I'm going to be a champion. Right. This is what they do in Russia, in Kazakhstan. This is what I'm going to do because I want to be a champion. No, that's not how it works. Competing at the Olympic level is a privilege. It's a privilege for countries to send delegations to the Olympic Games. It is not your right as a sovereign nation to send athletes to the Olympics. One of the pillars of the Olympic Games is fair play. And if countries aren't willing to accept that, then you can just have your own competition. I don't care. But you accept those conditions when you send your athletes to the games, and that's something that needs to be paid closer attention to, because it means something.
Yeah, I'm not sure how true of a statement this is these days, but I know back when Cheryl and I were getting tested so much by USADA, U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, the U.S. was one of the only countries that had their own anti-doping agency, if not the only one at that time. And Cheryl, maybe you can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but basically every other part of the world, every other country were only being tested by WADA, who is the World Anti-Doping Agency, and we were also being tested by them randomly as well, on top of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. Cheryl mentioned that it never bothered her to get drug tested, and for the most part, it didn't me either. But there, towards the end of my time being tested out of competition and in competition, they were starting to do blood test. And so I started to get really aggravated and frustrated and just carry a lot of maybe a little bit of anger towards what I was being exposed to in international competition, competing against athletes that would openly talk about what they were doing to get an advantage.
Right.
It's not like most of them were even trying to hide it. But so what would happen is that they would come to my house and they would ask for, some blood. And on one hand, I'm like, okay, this is cool. They're upping it. But at the same time, I know that my international competitors aren't getting this same treatment. So you're going to get some blood from me and I have to go try to train at a high level later on. And I don't know, physically, maybe it's not really going to bother you. But in my mind at that time, I was doing every single thing that I could in detail to be the best that I could be physically. And obviously a big part of that is eating at certain things at the right time, resting and sleeping, maybe being an incredibly lazy weightlifter and taking naps, that kind of thing. But I was very detailed. Everything I did centered around those workouts. And so somebody's going to come take blood from me and not take it from my international competitors. There's something about that really bothered me. But hopefully, it can continue to get better. Hopefully, they can continue to do these things that will even it out as much as possible, just as Cheryl mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, Chad, just real quick. No, you're right. Their internal drug testing monitoring, such as USADA, and there are only a handful of nations, I don't know how many now, but the nations who do monitor their athletes internally are also the nations who don't do well internationally in weightlifting, and that is not a coincidence. Mm-hmm. People in the United States are strong, amazing athletes. There's no reason why our weightlifters aren't as good as everybody else, with the exception of the doping situation. I think Sarah Robles recently posted a couple things about, all-time lifters, female, whoever snatched over 125 kilos or whoever clean and jerked over 160 kilos. And there I am on these lists, but you look ahead and virtually every single female who ever lifted more than me is from a suspect country. Mm-hmm. China, Russia, Kazakhstan, over and over and over again. There aren't many of them. I'm still on that list, right? But it's really hard to ignore what kind of career Chad and I both could have had, or any of these American athletes who do everything that they're supposed to do and still, not be the champion of the world, not be the Olympic gold medalist. And again, I did qualify this by saying I am a little bitter, so I apologize for the soapbox that I'm on right now. But I think it's important, and we don't want to discourage athletes who want to train and who are talented and who want to play by the rules. We don't want to discourage these people from participating because they don't feel like they can get a fair shake.
Yeah, and I don't blame you at all. I provoked it intentionally. I can imagine,
well, that works.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be one of the most infuriating at times, one of the most infuriating things imaginable. You're training in between, like your big competitions are 4 years apart. You're hoping to add a few kilos a year to your lifts, and you're in there every day for hours every day, just grinding away. And that, so-and-so competitor in another country is probably not clean, or sometimes for sure they're not clean. That would be infuriating.
Likely not clean. It's extremely infuriating, and something that it comes with the territory. So I mean, you're in this pursuit and you're actively training. You understand that is the situation, so you accept it to some degree because you hope that maybe you can overcome it just by working hard and naturally being a gifted athlete. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at those results and you see, I mean, there are people who finished ahead of me in many competitions who got popped later on for whatever reason. And but there are many women that I actively beat a lot who were doping. But it's hard to shake the idea that you could have a couple Olympic championships under your belt had the case been different.
Right. Well,
yeah,
the only thing that you can do is accept that the part which is outside of your control, right? It does you no good to just obsess over it for years, although it would be damn tempting.
I'll tell you guys right now, I was just going to say that I kind of want to say this to hopefully be an example for any of our athletes out there that are listening in, and this could be an athlete at any level, but specifically where I was for a handful of years in my training, I'd been on the international level. I'd been competing, internationally on average, probably 3 competitions a year for a number of years at that time. And I remember getting to the point to where in training, I was focused on these goals that were, I was basically chasing these individuals that were known to be on drugs and that were at the top of the sport internationally, as opposed to focusing on myself and gaining 1 kilo here and there. I was going for 10 kilos as opposed to 1. And that really, really caused me to probably work myself a little bit backwards for a number of years, as opposed to getting that 1 kilo. It was like, okay, I'm doing things in this way, which knocked me back 2 or 3 kilos, as opposed to going up 1 kilo at a time. Like you said, Mike, maybe I can get 1 or 2 kilos a year, which if I would have done that for the last 5 years of my career, I would have ended up, snatching something like 155 kilos, maybe clean and jerking 195 kilos as a 77 kilo lifter. But instead, I worked myself backwards and then ultimately ended up right around those same numbers. But the athletes that I really feel, the specific athletes that I really feel for, that come to the front of my mind that I think about all the time when it comes to this topic, is athletes like Cheryl, of course, but on the men's side, Shane Hammond, who never got a world championships or an Olympic medal, who probably should have. Oscar Chaplin, 2-time Olympian. Kendrick Ferris, 3-time Olympian. He went in 2008, 2012, and he was our sole male member in 2016. Just so talented and so strong that placed right there on the line of where he could have been in position potentially, that we just don't know. We don't know how good those individuals really were, because we don't know for sure who was on and who wasn't.
Yeah, that's a good point with the training real quick. I think a lot of people, especially, your type A type folks they're looking to what other individuals are doing. And we're all so much more connected on Instagram. Everybody's got a weightlifting seminar that they're doing, no matter what country they're from. And they're espousing all these different training methods and techniques. And, well, this is what it takes to be a champion in China. This is what it takes to be a champion in Russia. Well, guess what? You can't be a champion just by doing the Russian and Chinese program. It's much greater than the sum of its parts, and you must take into consideration that these athletes may or may not be supplementing their training, so they don't need the recovery time. So it goes back to understanding yourself, understanding, having a coach like Chad or like me or like Oscar Chaplin or any of these really, really great American athletes, weightlifters that we put out over the last couple years. They understand that. They understand that it's not just about the program that you're on. You really in weightlifting, you have to understand where other people are coming from, where they're training, why they're able to train that way. So I think it's a trap that a lot of people fall into. Well, I'm just going to do this guy's program because he's great and he lives in the Ukraine and it'll all be fine. Well, no, probably not, because there's a lot that's happening there that's not happening in your garage gym, or at least we hope not.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, before the show, Chad, you told me that there was a really interesting story about a high pressure card game at the Olympics. What's that about?
Yes, I love this story.
Oh, yeah. Cheryl can probably tell this story a little bit better, but what I will say is that if you know Shane Hammond, well, first of all, if you don't know Shane Hammond, you need to Google him or find some videos of him. He's an incredible athlete. He's very, very big. I think at his biggest, he was around 170 kilos, which is 374 pounds, but he can do a standing backflip. I wouldn't be surprised if he can still do it to this day. But
I'm sure he could. If you gave him if you bet him $100, he would smash it.
Yep.
Yeah, but and along those lines, he was a gambler, right, Cheryl? So we were playing this card game to say, okay, the loser is going to have to walk a great distance from where we were to the cafeteria in the Olympic Village, which none of us lazy weightlifters wanted to do, but we were all very hungry, especially our super heavyweights, Cheryl and Shane. And so they had McDonald's for free, which why would you do that at the Olympic Games? Why would you give us McDonald's for free?
I think they still have it.
Yeah, they do. And you know what? Everybody eats there. You go into the Olympic Village dining hall, the McDonald's in there, and McDonald's exists in every other country on the planet, but everybody wants to go get free McNuggets. And there's just something that's like fascinating about just getting as many Big Macs as you want and saying, I'll see you later. Sorry, Chad, go ahead.
No, absolutely. But, really the biggest thing that I remember, and Cheryl and I were talking about this the other day, is how nervous Shane was because he did not want to lose. But yeah, Cheryl, I'll let you pick it up from there.
Well, he's a gambler. He likes to go to the casino and just make things interesting. So we were being very lazy. We didn't want to go to the dining hall. It wasn't a great distance, but for us at the time, I just lived in Hong Kong, so I'm used to walking at this point, but would have done anything to avoid it at that moment. Many of us still had to compete. So we played this high stakes poker game, and the loser of the poker game had to go, I emptied out my little camera bag and had to go fill up the camera bag with as many burgers as they could. So the term nail biting, I think Shane was actually biting his nails. He was like rocking back and forth. He was like cold sweats. I'd never seen this man so nervous. And I've seen him compete at the Olympics and World Championships. He was such a mess. He was so scared he would have to go. But poor Oscar Chaplin III ended up losing that little match and obliging and going filling up. And we pigged out, man. We were like, hey, sorry, Oscar, but you lost. Get out of here.
Oh, man. So
yeah, it was
how
good.
How far are we talking? Like a quarter mile, I'm guessing?
Further than that.
Yeah, it was honestly, again, our gauge as weightlifters, especially back then, was very different than it is now, since I've been in the CrossFit community for so many years now. When I look back on the things that I was completely unwilling to do, it was completely silly. And I'll tell you that I learned a lesson at those Olympic Games hey, if you're going to come back to the Olympics in 2008, Chad, you're going to have to put a little bit of extra walking or a little bit of walking into your training somewhere, just so you'll be used to it and not feel mentally like you're going to be affected negatively by it. But I would say it was probably somewhere between a quarter and a half mile. I mean, we were a little further away from than a lot of people were from.
Yeah, we were on the back side of the complex. I think we were right alongside of a fence on the edge.
To ask a weightlifter who's basically just used to walking a very short distance to wherever they're training, to get up every now and then out of their chair and do a couple reps and then go sit back down, to ask them to walk there and to walk back, that was quite the task to expect of them. So it was certainly a pleasure to not be on the losing end of that bet.
I remember actually almost every single time at the Olympics, when we would get outfitted prior to going, we would all have this little summit. All the Olympians get together in different waves, and we get outfitted and we get sent to wherever the games are. My clothes never fit at the end of it because my physical activity would always increase due to walking and things like that. So my clothes would always be, the clothes that I got outfitted with just a few weeks before would always be much looser by the end of the games. When you're a super heavyweight, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Right.
But weightlifters do, we have a talent. I remember seeing the sports psychologist at the Olympic Training Center, and he was just on the second floor up a flight of steps. He was like, man, I never see you weightlifters. I was like, why is that? I thought that maybe we were stubborn or something like that. He was like, y'all just don't like to walk up the steps. And I remember I found an elevator inside one of the buildings that none of the other girls knew about. And as soon as I told people there was an elevator and we didn't have to climb the single flight of steps, guess what we did after training every day? We all took the elevator. It didn't matter how further out of the way it was. If there's an elevator in the building, the weightlifter's going to find it and they're going to use it.
Yeah, the whole sport is about finding a more efficient way to move.
That's right. And I apply that to every aspect of my life, let me tell you.
So I want to talk about a couple interesting experiences that, Chad, you mentioned before the show. And Cheryl, if you have anything to add, please do so. Chad, you have two experiences of bombing out that really, really stick out in your career, and the first being the 03 World Championships. Can you talk about that experience and especially at the end, what you learned from it?
Oh yeah, that was definitely a tough experience for me, and the big reason why is because I think I was mentioning somewhere the other day that around that time I was kind of allowing the support and presence of my family at competitions to be kind of a negative thing, because it put extra pressure on me. And they didn't realize they wanted to be there. And of course, they wanted to do everything they could to support me. But I learned through the years to take that in for what it was and to share the experience with them. And it actually added to my ability to perform. So I was able to turn that around and use it as motivation. But so that was part of it. I had probably 5 or 6 members of my family there. So I wanted to perform not just well, but very well for them. And then also it was a year that was obviously right before the Olympics, 2003, going into 2004. And our points were very important. That was a competition that helped decide how many Olympic spots we got. So I was feeling the pressure from that as well. Now, in the moment, I kind of thought that, okay, you're good enough to put all this out of your head and you're going to do it anyway. But honestly, looking back, it's not something that I was able to do as well as I thought I could. I had just done really, really well at the Pan American Games not too long before that. Really well, meaning I won the gold medal at the Pan American Games, one of my greatest accomplishments, I would say. And then so there, I'd gotten pretty sick at the Pan American Games, and I've got a story that I won't dig into, but basically it involves me clenching my cheeks together on every attempt to make sure that I wasn't going to, do something on myself that would have been a little bit embarrassing. But despite that, I was able to do well. But afterwards, my body just basically let loose, and I got pretty sick enough to where I ended up having to go to the hospital when I got back home. But so I came back from that and started training for the World Championships. Ultimately, really physically came back around. I wouldn't say that I had physically any effects from that going into the World Championships, but it was a weird experience, and I think anyone that's ever done this, ever gone into a competition and not made any snatches or any clean and jerks can kind of agree. Like it just happened so fast. It was like all I can remember is 3 times hearing the weight rattle from hitting my hips, and then hearing it hit the platform, and this was on the snatch. So it was like 2 bangs, and that happened 3 times really quickly. And I don't really remember anything other than that, because I can say focus-wise, I certainly was not in the moment. I wasn't zeroed in. I definitely wasn't in the zone. I was just kind of outside of myself somewhere. I'm kind of proud that I was able to shake that off and come back and do well in the clean and jerk. I made 2 of 3 clean and jerks and tied the best clean and jerk that I'd ever made up to that point, which was 185 kilos. So I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to, again, push that aside and come back and do that. But I guess what I learned from that was a part of me learning that things aren't just automatic. You have to have more skill to overcome things and focus and be in the moment. So it was a part of me learning how to focus better within competition and within each lift, and zeroing in on one lift at a time as opposed to looking ahead. And then also that idea of, hey, your family and your support system, you don't have to do anything extra or special. You just need to do you and be with them and share the experience with them.
Did anything tactical come out of that revelation in terms of your focusing and staying present with each lift?
Yeah, it definitely did, because it was kind of a part of a phase that I went through, a kind of a slump that I went through for a number of years, where I wasn't near as consistent in competition as I was before. And, what ultimately came of it, well, first of all, in the middle of that, I can remember, and I use this when I teach all the time, I can remember just being very desperate in competition. And I remember walking up to or standing behind the bar on competition platform, closing my eyes and trying to visualize a successful lift. And at that time, I couldn't. I would try to visualize and I could not make the lift in my head. And so I would walk up to the bar and the phrase that was going through my head was, please don't miss this lift. Please don't miss this lift. And I remember literally picking the weight up from the floor. And as I'm picking the weight up from the floor and going through the rest of the lift, please don't miss this lift goes through my head like 2 or 3 times. And so I could have at least been thinking, please make this, but that still wouldn't have been better. It wouldn't have been the skill that I now have, which is, it doesn't matter if I do have negative thoughts coming in. It doesn't matter if I'm distracted or if I'm not feeling good or if I don't believe in myself, because I have the skill and the ability to kind of snap my finger, to input a couple words into my head and to go feel that within the movement. And that puts me in the moment. And that's the skill that I developed and that I kind of developed out of necessity. This is how I found my way out of that slump that I was in. And this idea of focusing and being in the moment is something that is probably the second most important thing, and my second biggest passion as a teacher and coach, second to teaching and working on the squats, which we probably should not get into because Cheryl knows I'll talk about that for much too long.
So you said snap your fingers and throw in a couple positive words or something like that. What can you go into detail about that?
Yeah, and it's really not about putting words into my brain. It's about knowing specifically what I'm going to be working to feel within the lift. So to me, to focus is to feel.
Okay.
So I know the areas and what parts of my body I specifically want to feel as I'm executing that lift through the extension. So like from the floor, I'm very much being as aggressive as I can, locking my back in and feeling the maintenance of that from the floor. When I do that, that puts my awareness where it needs to be. Then I'm moving up as the bar comes up. I'm feeling my shoulders stretch in front of the bar at around the level of the knee. This isn't specific for everyone. It's just for me and what allows me to execute the best. And then from there, it's just about me being as aggressive and violent as I can through my extension.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds just like a mindfulness practice.
Yes.
I love it, man. So tell me now about Beijing. You hit 3, or I'm not sure how many snatches, but you hit some snatches and then you bombed out in the clean and jerks. And I've got to imagine that's one of the toughest experiences for anyone to go through.
Yeah, it was definitely really tough. I mean, obviously the Olympics is something that I was working towards. I wanted to go back to the Olympics after 2004. And I wanted, just like anyone else, I wanted to have the best competition of my life. And I guess really it was a little different than the snatches in 2003. I actually missed my first attempt in the snatch there in Beijing and then made the next 2. So I was able to come back and do that. And the snatch that I made was right there close to the best I'd ever done. And I would say that I probably got a little bit greedy on my opening attempt. I mean, it wasn't like it was a weight that I hadn't done and I hadn't done many times in competition, but I took it mostly because it was a weight that I needed to step ahead of 1 or 2 specific lifters from these specific countries that I wanted to be ahead of. And I was confident that I could do it. Ultimately, it just didn't happen. And I remember, missing the first 2. And the only thing I really remember other than that is the last clean being very good, the best one that I'd done. And then the jerk getting locked out overhead, but being a little bit forward. And I remember, I feel like I fought that lift for about 5 minutes. And obviously It was, only like a second, but I fought it and tried to hold on to it as much as I could. Ultimately, it just fell forward, kind of crooked. And I remember also cracking the glass that was in the front of the platform that was covering the camera. There was a camera in the middle of the platform coming up at an angle, but I remember cracking that. So I'm actually kind of proud of that. That's
cool.
Cool.
Awesome. I didn't realize you smashed that. Yeah, there's this weird camera that's looking in your face as you're getting your grip on the bar, and it's kind of that camera angle, and there's a big thick piece of glass that protects that, but Chad smashed it. That's awesome.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was one of those things that was very unfortunate, but at the same time, as many people are, when you have big failures like that, you especially as a optimistic, positive athlete, I tried to take what I could from it, as hard as it was for many years for me. When I'd look back on that, even years later, I'm going to be honest with you, like it would sink in every now and then, and I would start crying. I mean, it was just very, very difficult. And but I'll tell you what came out of that is that it made me an even better competitor than I'd ever been, because now the focus thing that I talked about was something that contributed to me being in the moment and being free from the end result. After that in Beijing, I've never been more free from the end result, and because I don't have anything else to fear.
Right.
Like I've already not made any lifts in the clean and jerk at the Olympic Games.
Damn, man.
Who cares about anything else? So my freedom is very strong, and I'm very carefree, and I'm able to execute better than ever because of that. And that's really what I want for everyone else that I come across, and trying to find a way to help them learn that freedom without having to go through something like that.
Man, how do you teach that to someone who's never lost anything before?
So it's definitely difficult. I think, no one's going to be able to get to that point without going through some sort of failure like that, unfortunately. Yep. But the best thing that I can give them is that idea of focusing and being in the moment. And if they work on that long enough, they can develop a very strong skill and ability in that regard. Another thing that I do with a lot of people that really helps this sink in a little bit more is, say, for example, maybe they've tried a jerk, for example, that they've missed 2 or 3 times, and maybe it's a PR, maybe it's not. I've done it. Not that I've done this a lot, maybe like 5 people, but I'll walk up to them and I'll say, look, you've already missed this a number of times. I want you to understand on this next lift that you are going to miss it. You're going to lift to miss this next lift. All I'm asking is that you execute the best of your ability these few things that I want you to feel within the lift. And now I'm not going to say this is always going to happen, but the people that I've tried it with so far, on the very next lift, they actually make it, and they make it very easy, because what I did is I was able to free them from that end result, and they're able to really execute and be in the moment.
That is kick ass. I love that. And again,
I loved every second of that.
Yeah, I really love the mindfulness approach that you're really promoting there. So you're getting rid of the fear and then bringing their awareness to their body. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
So I got a couple more questions before we wrap it up, if you've got time.
Of course.
Yes, please do.
Cool. So the sport, as we've been talking about this already, the sport is so different than when you competed, in that there's a lot more competition, and there's just way more exposure in the sport. And as you started to say earlier, Cheryl, social media is huge in weightlifting, and I think in part because it's such an explosive sport, so it's just really fun to follow. Knowing what it takes to compete at the highest level, do you think that social media is distracting athletes from what they really need to be doing?
That's a really good question. I think that it can. But just like anything else, or really any individual with a phone or a computer or whatever, it's really easy to kind of get wrapped up in how your viewfinder is seeing things and not being there, and you're kind of just performing for the sake of your followers. However, that being said, that I think it can be a really important tool as well. I think people filming themselves working out, I think, can really help technically an athlete who is used to seeing themselves a lot. It's a really, really important tool, but it can be distracting. Maybe I'm just from a different generation, but every time anything interesting happens in the gym, my first thought is not to get my phone. But I can see the value in that. And then athletes, by and large, we have to do what we can to pay the bills, to generate interest in ourselves, to promote ourselves, because we're also trying to make a living.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of marketing tools at athletes, at their fingertips that they can utilize just by virtue of being good at something like Instagram. So I don't begrudge any athlete for putting themselves out there and saying, hey, look, this is what I can do. This is why you should care. This is my journey. And if you want to help me out along the way, donations are welcome,
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword, for real.
It's certainly a different era. There's a few lifts that I made in training and a few things without a barbell that I did during my career that I would love to now have on video, but it just, you just don't have that phone, or we just didn't have that phone back then. But I think anything can be distracting. And here's what I would say to the athletes in this era now with Instagram and social media being such a big thing. You have to do whatever you need to do to be the best that you can. And so if social media, if Instagram is a distraction for you and it causes you to think of yourself in a negative way, like I know a lot of female weightlifters, for example, that they'll get on there and they'll look at certain things and it will cause them to compare themselves or whatever the situation may be that is a negative and it's a distraction for them and it's hurting their confidence. If that's the case, then maybe you should think about getting off of it or doing whatever you need to do to be better. On the other hand, if you taking a video of yourself and you posting it every now and then is motivating, if it helps you, if it builds up your self-esteem and your confidence, then by all means use it and do it. So I think it should be taken on an individual basis. And if it can help you, use it. If it's not helping you, if it's bringing you backwards, then make a change.
Yeah, I like that. And I really like the point about, social media helps lifters make money these days. And one of the biggest issues that we have in the sport is that, lifters don't get paid a lot. So it's just really hard to make it a full-time sport. So very few or full-time pursuit, right? Because people end up needing jobs and all of these things. So if it helps you be a full-time athlete and you can use it without being used by it, I think it can be a great thing. But I'm a huge proponent around making rules around technology. Like we don't bring our phone in the bedroom or in restaurants or we create rules and boundaries in which we can still be present in our lives, and so it gives us a kind of a reprieve from constantly being plugged in and constantly comparing ourselves to others and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Those and then being an athlete who is truly striving for greatness, that's a part of the discipline that one has to learn in every aspect of your life. So if it's social media is your nemesis or something that you wrestle with, or that it gives you these negative thoughts, then that's a discussion that you need to have with your coach and be honest with yourself about, because it can be addicting, right? We're so curious about what everybody else is doing. And Chad made a really good point about confidence. You really must do everything you can to maintain your own confidence, and going back to competition and maybe not having the best performance. I think there was only 1 or 2 times that I approached the bar knowing somewhere in the back of my mind that it wasn't going to happen, where I was able to talk myself back into it and turn it around. So once those negative thoughts get in there, whether it is as a result of social media or some sort of a situational issue, it's hard to get them out of there. So you have to do yourself as many favors as possible. You can use it as motivation. And if it's something that is holding you back, you really have to be honest with yourself and reevaluate the situation.
So just to leave listeners with something that they can take into their training or into their sport, what is something that an athlete could do to get an edge at this point with so much competition? What's something that either of you or both of you can say, if an athlete did X every day or every week, he or she would have an edge over the competition?
I think that more people than not need to bring themselves back to the basics and make sure that all of that is covered. You need to check your mobility. If there's any mobility limitations that you have, you need to figure that out and start doing something probably for that every single day so you can make a change. You need to make sure that you're balanced as an athlete as well, so that you're not compensating, so that your upper body's not out of balance with your lower body, your anterior isn't out of balance with the posterior, and that kind of thing. Because if you have any of those physical limitations, even if they're slight, you're going to be compensating. Your movement isn't going to be as effective and as efficient as it can be. You're going to leave yourself open for, potential injury, slight injury, whether they're slight or not, or reoccurring or whatever. They're going to take time away from your training. They're going to limit your overall potential and your performance and your longevity. So start to try to zero in on things that will lead to health and longevity, and the performance part of it will come as a byproduct of that.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And that's the kind of thing that no one's going to see an immediate benefit from that, but they're going to get injured less over the course of their career. They're going to move more efficiently. And so, a year, 2 years, 3, 4 years down the line, they're seeing huge dividends by being committed to that type of process. That's great advice.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with that. I think through coaching, the primary thing that I see is people unwilling to dedicate the time to mobility. People who work really, really hard, who, for whatever reason, think that as long as they snatch and clean and jerk and squat enough, then the result will be better. That does work for a while, but these positions that we all get into are extremely specific. If you're not stacking correctly, if you're overusing I see a lot of people trying to use their arms, more specifically in weightlifting, and they don't understand why it's all falling apart. So mobility, I think, is so critical, and spending time cultivating a good bottom position. The best weightlifters in the world can sit really low and comfortably under the weights. And I think a lot of people approach the barbell as if it's some bear that they have to wrestle, when it's much more about cadence and timing and the movement patterns themselves. And it's not about what's on the barbell. I want the empty barbell to look exactly like your heaviest weight lifted that day. And a lot of people just don't bother to make that so. And I think it's critical as well to make sure that you're being coached by somebody who understands all this, especially if you want to compete, somebody who has the experience as a coach or as an athlete or both, to be able to explain how you're going to feel and how to deal with results that aren't exactly the way you want them, and vice versa. How to maintain the confidence and the trajectory of having a great competition and then moving on from there, because there's so many nuances to every aspect of this, and you must have good guidance. And I will say the accessory work as well. I should have been doing so much more core work, so much more accessory upper body work than I did as an athlete, which was virtually none. And I got injured a lot as a result. I think if you can get a coach who has your health as their priority, because if you are healthier and more balanced as an athlete, like Chad said, you're going to have a better relationship with the barbell. You're going to look forward to training more often, and you will get strong as a result.
Right.
Of that process.
And that's a tall order. Someone that understands how to program for a weightlifter, how to keep weightlifters healthy, but also understands the psychology. There are not a ton of those around, but I agree. It's worth spending the time searching for that type of coach. And if you can't find someone like that, then really take ownership over your own performance and figure some of that stuff out for yourself, because you can figure anything out with the internet these days.
Yeah, Mike, I was going to say, I love what you just said there. Take ownership and kind of figure out on your own if you need to. But even if you do have one of those coaches, it's important for me to put out there that you guys have to take ownership for yourself anyway. We're here to help you as much as we can and to guide you, and we can give you a program. We can tell you what to do. We can give you cues and everything else. But in the end, your progress and your performance is by and far mostly up to you. I mean, I had a lot of support and a lot of help along the way, and I learned, basically everything I know about weightlifting from a few coaches that I came across along the way. But by and far, I did what I did because of me. I put in the work. I did what they told me to do when they told me to do something, and I got it done. In the end, you're out there on the platform by yourself. You're the one that is executing the lift. So take ownership no matter what, is what I would say.
And with that ownership, with that accountability, comes a sense of power, right? You're out there on the platform by yourself, and you don't feel like you need your coach whispering in your ear to keep you confident, right? You're the source of your own confidence at that point.
Right. You have to embrace that that you're going to be standing up there by yourself in your little spandex suit, and it helps tremendously to know that you've done everything required of you to prepare for that. You can lead a horse to water, as they say, and there are many instances just in the last few years of coaching where I feel like I make a really, really excellent, well thought out argument for why, hey, we need to start doing this more and doing that more. Well, it all comes down to whether compliancy, right? The athlete has to be willing to do that, and there needs to be enough trust there between an athlete and a coach for them to just to accept that. So taking ownership is critical. It's critical because, like Chad said, it's just you.
Hell yeah. Well, this has been phenomenal, guys. Can you tell me a little bit about the podcast? What's the theme? What can people expect from it? And where can they kind of keep up to date with the release of it?
Yeah, we're doing right now we're just working on getting a number of recordings put together and, getting those all finished up. And our hope is to release somewhere towards the middle of May. Right now we have a tentative day of Monday, May 21st, where we're going to start to release a couple episodes. But, as I mentioned earlier, it's just something that I've become very passionate about and an avenue that I want to pursue further in being involved with the sport that I love and being a supporter and a voice and a face for USA Weightlifting. And, Cheryl and I were reunited at the World Championships last year a little bit. And that's where we kind of started to come together on some of these things, and learning that she has a lot of the same passion and desire to be a part of the sport in the same way. That's basically how we kind of got teamed up again. And her and I will be doing more commentating together at our national events and, just really anywhere that we can. And so, basically with the podcast, we're just trying to get with our top coaches and athletes currently here in the U.S. and just getting their stories out there and getting them on these recordings and talking about, just talking about weightlifting and talking about where they came from. And our hope is that the listeners can tune in and, take at least one or two things, if not more, away from each episode that they can kind of immediately and easily apply to their own life or their own training. A lot of these stories that we're going to come across are going to be very, very motivating and humbling and inspiring. And that's what I want to be a part of. And that's what's really my motivation for being a part of this whole thing. And, again, it's going to be the official USA Weightlifting podcast. You guys will be able to keep up with that on the old social networks there through USA Weightlifting.
Piggybacking off of that is very important to USA Weightlifting and Chad and I to make people understand that it's about alumni too. It really is. And it's about reaching back out into the weightlifting community with some of the amazing champions that we've had over the years and saying, hey guys, we're here doing this thing, but we want you to join us. We want you to come and we want you to contribute with us and make weightlifting a stronger sport that we all can enjoy, even if we're retired or what have you, because the weightlifters out there need it. They need the inspiration, and we have so much knowledge just through going through our careers, and we just feel the need both to share that with everybody, and hopefully we'll get a lot more weightlifters, former champions who will join up with us.
Well, I can't wait to hear what you guys put together. I know this is there's a big need for it in the weightlifting space, and people are going to really, really get a lot of value out of it. Where can they find both of you on social media?
I'm on Instagram at Haworth Weightlifting. Haworth without a Y for some reason. So it's at HAWORTH Weightlifting. And Facebook, Haworth Weightlifting. That's pretty much it. I mean, I got a Twitter handle. It's like Haworth_weights, but I haven't really gotten to the whole Twitter. It's all I can do to Instagram.
Right.
So I'm focusing on that now. But yeah, and I'm here in Buckhead, Atlanta. Just do a Google search. I'm at a place called BTB CrossFit in Buckhead, but I share a space that Haworth Weightlifting operates out of, a barbell club. So if anybody's in the area, definitely come find me.
Yeah, my big thing is definitely Instagram. I'm there at Ollie Chad, OLYCHAD. I think some people get mad at me for saying Ollie. They would prefer me say Oli Chad, but I think since I was an Olympian, I have the right to say it however I want, right?
Say it however you want.
That's right. You do, Chad.
But yeah, Ollie Chad, and then on Facebook, Chad Vaughn. but definitely try to put out, regular content there. And of course, anything coming out with the podcast will be, at least reposted through that as well, so you guys can keep up with this. And definitely hope that you guys are motivated to tune in to what we're going to be offering, and hope you enjoy. And certainly along the way, we'd love for anyone out there to chime in and just let us know how we're doing, and what you guys want to hear from us on, and who you want to hear from. We'll be doing also some Q&A episodes that we'll be reaching out to the listeners to just be a part of it.
Hell yeah, guys. Thank you so much for your time. This is obviously one that I really enjoyed. We went 95 minutes and I usually go an hour. So obviously we were kicking ass. So thank you guys for your time, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. And it was a pleasure to finally get to talk to you.
Yeah, Mike, thanks again. And we'll be in touch.
Awesome.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW.